Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper. Thanks for hanging out with me today. We're going to be creating a one-layer scene card. So get comfy and let's get crafty. So I have a piece of cardstock cut down to a mini slimline size. That means it is 3.5 inches tall by 6 inches long. I also have a piece of scrap paper. This is going to be where we create our map. I'm going to be using the Jennie masking magic to create the masks today. And I've already stamped the images I've planned to use in this card onto some masking tape or masking paper so the ink can dry. So I'm using the gnomes from the Simon Says Stamp Spring Gnomies stamp set because they're cute and adorable and they're the perfect size for mini slimline cards. So to create our map, I've taken all of the stamps that I intend to use and put them onto stamp blocks. And then I'm going to stamp them on this piece of scrap paper where I want to use them on my card. Now they're going to overlap. It's going to look funny. This is just the planning phase. This is how I know which images need to be stamped first and masked over to create that dimensional look without having intersecting lines and odd looking things. So I have the gnome with the duckies and a couple of mushrooms. Obviously I have the tulips because I have to have the tulips because tulips are amazing. And I do want to add another mushroom right here on the back of the gnome. And it will actually sit behind the tulips when we're all done. So now I'm going to take a pen and number which order to stamp the images. So the gnome and the tulips and the gnome will be first. The tulips and the small mushroom will be second. The big mushrooms will be third, and that chickie on top will be fourth. And that's how I'm going to stamp them. And so now I'm going to go off camera and cut out all my masks. I'll need 2 of those mushrooms. And now voila, we're back. So this is how we're going to use the map to create our card front. So the first thing I do is stick that map right down in the bottom corner of my MISTI, and I lay the first stamp onto that already stamped image, and then I put my card base in, and I'm stamping with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink because it is Copic marker friendly or alcohol marker friendly, and that's what I plan to color with today. And once I have the gnome stamped, I can go ahead and put his mask down on top of that stamped image. I did cut off that little chickie when I was cutting out the mask because his legs don't need to be masked off and they're quite frankly way too stinking small to even try and cut out. So that mask became 2 pieces. Now we are putting the map back in and putting down the stamps that are labeled number 2, which is the small mushroom and the tulips. So those are going to be our second layer of stamping. So we're working toward the back. And again, I'm stamping those with that black ink and using my fingers to add pressure with my MISTI lid just so that I can make sure and get a nice clean image. And then I will cover those with their masks as well. Now the tulips I cut into 3 parts because again, stems, they're not any thicker than the chicken feet, and some of the grass even did not quite make it, but that's okay. That's a non-issue for this particular card. If you're making a card where you have some really narrow pieces you need to mask, there are other products like masking fluids that you can mask those smaller sections off with. Okay, so we've done layer 1 and layer 2. It is now time to do layer 3, which are these larger mushrooms. And I'm going to have to stamp that 2 times because I only have 1 of those stamps, right? So I lay the mushroom down on my map and remember to put my card base back down in that bottom corner and add that mushroom to the background of our card, and I will add the mask. It did take a minute for me to get those masks off their backing paper. It's a thing. It's a thing. And then I'm going to move that big mushroom or the larger mushroom over to the other side and stamp that down as well. And the 4th layer is that little chicken. It does not really need to be mapped out, like we can just put that on the mushroom. However, my big messy bun knot head's probably going to get in the way, trying to make sure I was not stamping the chicken up, like with a little bit of space between the mushroom and his feet, because that would look weird. I mean, then I'd have to figure out how to make it look like he was flying. Let's just be honest. And then it's time to work on our background. Well, first I have to put the mask on this little chickie. And then we're going to work on our background. So I have a zig pen, and I'm going to extend that the ground, and I have another piece of masking tape. Now I know this is going really fast. If you want to watch it in a slower version, turn the volume off and slow it down through YouTube settings, because you could leave it going, but my voice would sound ridiculous. This masking magic can actually be torn and as well as cut. So I did go ahead and tear it to give it kind of that less than perfect edge. And now I'm going to ink blend a light layer of green ink along the ground. I'm doing this because I'm going to color the grass in with Copic markers, but it's not going to be perfect, right? It's not going to be solid. So I needed a layer. Now I've taken the little piece I tore off and I've covered up the grass just in case. And I'm going to use this My Favorite Things cloud stencil. You could use any cloud stencil you want. You could hand cut a cloud stencil. You could find stamped stencils or cloud stamps. You could draw clouds. You could do a whole blue background in this because we've covered up all of those stamped images with masks. You could literally ink blend all of the background blue. So now that I've got that ink blending done with the clouds and the grass, I am taking my masks off. And if they come off clean enough to reuse, I'm putting them on the back of the stamp package because then I don't have to cut them out again. And that will just go back in my sleeve pack or my stamp sleeve. And then I have them when I need them. So the grass. The grass is created with flicking motions where you put the tip of your pen down and just flick it up. So the bottom is a thicker stroke than the tip. And I did put the gnome mask back down so that I could flick that grass up and not have it coming up over his clothes and his arms and things. I felt like he probably would be laying on top of the grass in this particular instance. I did not care too much if the grass blades went up the mushrooms or even that little chickie who's looking forward or the tulips. I didn't think that was too big of a deal, although that chickie looking forward is part of the mask, so he will be sitting on top of the grass as well. I am using a 3-color blend. I have a YG23, YG17, and a G29. And then I'm going to do the greens of the other foliage. Wow, that was a hard word. Words are hard. The stems and leaves of the tulips, the blades of grass around the mushrooms, just to add a little bit more green. I will say I did not pre-plan the color palette or I guess that's the right word, color palette of this card at all. It mostly looks okay. It doesn't look horrendous, but it's a little bit of a stretch. I'm not going to lie. I did have two and 3 colors on those blades of grass. The mushrooms, I'm going to color the stems and the undersides with the E30 families. And I'm trying to remember to put the shadows on the left side. Clearly on this small mushroom, I totally forgot that. So I did have to bring in a darker like the E39 to fix that shadowing. But it's okay. It's fine. You can't really tell. There's not a ton of dimension on that stem anymore. But it's a little mushroom and it's in the shade of the bigger mushroom. So it's okay. You can't really tell. Once I get the stems of the mushrooms colored in, I'm going to color in the undersides of the mushrooms with the E30 and E33. So all of the mushroom is done in the E30 family. I have sped this up. This is like 2 times normal speed, just because otherwise it was going to be a really long card. And mostly I just wanted to give you a better instruction on how to do 1-layer scene cards. So this week's crime and coloring video, I did a 1-layer scene card, but I didn't really talk about how to create that stacked dimension because our story was long and I wanted to tell our story. So I decided that I would go ahead and do another scene card today in order to maybe have a little bit more explanation. So while I am coloring the rest of these images, we're just going to talk about how to create that perspective. So you watched me make the map and you watched me number the images that I wanted to stamp in order. And the way you determine that order is what image do you want to have in the front of your scene? And that would be the thing you stamped and masked first. So you're actually working from the front of your scene to the background of your scene. So it feels sometimes like you're stamping it in reverse order, but it works. Now, I am a huge fan of creating a map without masking, just creating the map so that I can see if images are going to work together well. For example, these mushrooms are working with this particular gnome image because he's laying down on the grass. I don't have, like there's another gnome in there that's pushing a wheelbarrow. These mushrooms would be shorter than that, so they would have to go way into the background to make it, you'd have to fill in that space on the bottom, if that makes any sense at all. Anyways, another thing to pay attention to when you're doing scene cards is making sure that your images in the front have the most detail, and the farther back they get, the less detail they can have. Like if you're drawing a scene of trees, you want the trees in the front of the image to be highly detailed, lots of depth and dimension and colors. And as you work back, they're going to be narrower. They're going to have fewer colors in their coloring. They're going to have fewer lines or details in that image. And that's because they're the background. And that's how you create that dimension. For example, on this card, my clouds, I did very lightly. The color of blue I used is called Sky Blue from Altenew. And I did not put a very heavy layer on. I just wanted to give that illusion of clouds so that it looked like a sky background. I didn't want the clouds to become the focus of anything. I just wanted to create that illusion. Another thing in this card is I colored the little puffball and brim of his hat. I left it white, but you can't just leave it white. You have to put the shadows in. So I put a light color gray just where the shadow would create the darkest, and then I left a lot of it white. So when you look at it in real life, it doesn't look like I just left that piece uncolored or unfinished. There is a little bit of a color differentiation so that you can see the shadows. Now to the red. I left the red for the last because if I had colored them first and then tried to color the underside of that mushroom with those light E3s, the red would have bled into those 3s because they are a lighter color ink. And reds are, for me, one of the hardest color families to blend together. There's such a huge range of reds. You know, you've got your orange reds and your blue reds, and they're hard for me to blend together. It's hard for me to pick color combinations that I feel work the way I want them to. So I left that for the end. I did a little bit of scratching on scrap paper to see how the ones I was selecting would work. Sometimes I go on Pinterest or online to look for color combinations, but most of the time I just grab a piece of cardstock and scribble them out to see if they blend together well. In these bigger mushrooms, you're going to see a higher percentage of the middle color and a lower percentage of your shadow and your highlight. And that's just the way that color works. Like the shadows don't overtake an image that's in the daylight like this. The shadows are just where the shadows would be, right? As opposed to being completely in shadow because there's something blocking it. Anyways, now that I'm all finished with my Copic coloring, I'm bringing in a number 10 Jelly Roll white gel pen to add the dots to the mushrooms back in. You could just use the same technique with the brim of the hat, but my reds kind of bled into those little dots, so I just filled them in with the white gel pen. I'm adding some Wink of Stella to the tulips. And then I realized I forgot to do the white dots on his hat. So I brought my gel pen back in and I'm adding the little white dots to his hat. And then I'm adding Wink of Stella to the birdies because it's my card and I can. That's literally the only reason. I felt like I wanted to glitter it up a little bit. I have pulled from my cardstock stash this kind of dark peacock color to create a slimline base card. So the piece of paper is 7 inches by 6 inches. And on the 7-inch side, it is scored at 3.5. I want to create a border. I didn't like it going edge to edge, so I've trimmed my panel down to 3.25 by 5 3/4. And I'm going to glue that with double-sided tape onto the front of my card. I'm using my ATG. And I'm just giving that it's a very narrow, it's like 1/8 of an inch border around the card panel. And I just kind of like that. I'm a border kind of gal. And then I'm inserting the copy paper to the inside of my card, and it's all done. Scene cards are a little more time consuming when you're trying to go for that one layer look, but I think it's worth it. They turn out looking so cool. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I have a couple other videos here I think you might like. I've also added a subscribe button. If you have not subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you did. Give me a thumbs up, tell YouTube you liked the video, leave me a comment down below, and have a really fabulous day.